She currently does run the Civil Rights Division, a big deal of the D.O.J. But she is on the right side of everything. I mean that. So not only do I respect her, the job that she does, and Trump knows that, but I just think she's a great lady. And a New Yorker, too. My friend Harmeet Dhillon. Harmeet, good morning. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me again, Sid.
It's great to have you. You know, you fight for everything we care about here. You fight to eradicate anti-Semitism, and there's nobody you're afraid to go after. You fight to make sure our elections are real and all that fraud eventually goes away. You fight for our kids to be able to go to some of our finest institutions like Harvard without being harassed. Harmeet Dhillon, you're an American hero.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I work with a team of about 200 fine lawyers at the Civil Rights Division, and we are charged with protecting the civil rights of all Americans. And it's been a tremendous honor to be able to fight for the American people in this role over the last year and a half. And, I couldn't thank the president more for giving me this opportunity. But there's so much work to be done, Sid. It's like an around-the-clock job. You get up and you find out some new discrimination has happened. Some politician has weaponized things against people. Some, governor, some secretary of state has allowed non-citizens onto the voting rolls. And, so it's basically a nonstop job fighting the incursions on our civil rights. And it's great to be able to do it. But we absolutely have to be vigilant constantly.
Dov Hikind joined me earlier today. I'm sure you know who Dov is. He spent almost 40 years. You know Dov, Assemblyman, of course, Borough Park. And he said, Sid, first he thanked me for my comments on Fox. You don't have to do that. But he did say him and the former governor, David Patterson, are calling on the Justice Department to investigate the climate of Jew hatred and incitement, that the mayor has created in New York. So, for example, when he comes out, and he knew all along, he's not stupid, he knew all along he could never arrest the Israeli prime minister. He knew that, okay? But he wanted to gin up all the support from his base and make people mad. So when he comes out afterwards and says that he expects people to hit the streets, basically asking New Yorkers to riot when Bibi gets there in September, that's a big issue. So if Hikind and Patterson send the DOJ a letter, my guess is you guys at the very least will look at it, yes?
Well, look, I don't need anyone to send me a letter to do my job. We're already looking at these issues. But let me just break this down. I think the rhetoric of the mayor has been inflammatory and dangerous. I think there already has been a climate in New York, which we've seen from the attacks on synagogues in the city, and which, by the way, the Department of Justice is investigating and or prosecuting several hate crimes in New York, in the boroughs, and in Manhattan as well. Park East Synagogue is one that I personally visited and met with a rabbi there who's a Holocaust survivor and heard some heartbreaking stories about how these mobs will come and create fear. So the mayor has gotten elected, frankly, on a wave of Jew hatred, and I think he is absolutely winking at it and fanning the flames and giving his supporters permission to accelerate this type of rhetoric. And you see it from politicians on the left now. You really can't be a rising politician in one side of our political spectrum without enabling this type of a speech. So that said, we do have a robust First Amendment in our country, and the standard for holding somebody liable for an actual act of violence, you have to be, basically inciting it directly right there in a mob setting. That's the Supreme Court precedent. So I think the bigger problem with the Mamdanis of the world is that people are voting for inevitable results here, and I think they should make different choices. That's the solution to this, is more of a political solution than otherwise. And you do see some people on the left. You see John Fetterman calling it out. And then you see the hair splitting. We've literally seen some of the activists on the pro-Palestinian side here in our country break it down for their followers how to slyly attack Jews without looking like you're doing it, by claiming you're just asking questions, you're just anti-Zionist, you're not anti-Jewish. That's not really the position that I think works out in reality. We're seeing that in our litigation against universities, is that people say, "Oh, we're not anti-Jewish. We're just anti-Zionist."
Right.
And
Nonsense.
but I mean, this is a distinction without a difference in most settings. And so, Sid, you not talked about it. This administration, this Department of Justice is absolutely vigilant and dedicated to this issue. There's no two ways about it. I immediately, opened an investigation into the stabbing that occurred a couple of days ago in New York. Both a Asian person and a Jewish man leaving a synagogue were violently attacked after, slogans were shouted that suggest it may have been hate inspired. And I will say kudos to New York for stepping up and already indicting that individual. He's gone in for psychiatric evaluation, I believe. But we're looking at that closely. And if the punishment doesn't fit the crime, the Department of Justice always has the ability to step in on these types of cases. And so it is sad. I started school, Sid, I think I'd mentioned this before, at Public School 108 in the Bronx, and had a lot of folks there, from a diverse set of backgrounds. And to see this happen to New York today, where I lived for many years, is absolutely heartbreaking.
It really is. This is the head of the Civil Rights Division of the D.O.J., big-time lady, wonderful lady, Harmeet Dhillon. Part of my appearance on Fox, I went after Mamdani, but I also talked about how I felt about the Iran war, and there's these psychos out there, and you don't have to say it, I will, Alex Jones and, Michael Flynn Jr. and, this guy Joe Kent. You know what aggravated me about them? Before they even talked about what I said about the war, and they're entitled to their opinion, they all described me as Israel first advocate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's anti-Semitic there, right?
Well, it's intended as a slur. I mean, I would, of course it's intended as a slur, and you do see, let's be very clear. You do see what we call the horseshoe right, parts of the far right bending towards the far left and using support for Israel, America's longtime closest ally in the Middle East, as a slur. It's not something to be ashamed of, to support your friends and your allies. Now, foreign policy is not my portfolio, so I will leave that to the experts. But, I think that it's alarming to see the rise of this type of rhetoric in our country, in podcasters, even in some politicians on the right, even some people who have gotten themselves jobs in the deep state. They usually get found out in this administration. But there really can be no sunshine between our government and our allies. And, it shouldn't be shameful to be supportive of our allies. And I think it's really unfortunate. But, you're able to stand up to those bullies pretty well. What's shocking to see is your Chuck Schumers of the world and others like that who, spent their life supporting the right side of this, and suddenly they're shut up by others. And so that's concerning. That's just my personal opinion. Of course, I'm not speaking for the DOJ there. But as for the DOJ, every single instance of an attack on any house of worship will be prosecuted, investigated. We're going hard against these universities. I'm suing Harvard over their blatant years of anti-Semitism.
And is that still going on, Harvard, Harmeet?
Yes. I mean, so what happens is we have two lawsuits against Harvard. Harvard has a lawsuit against us for cutting off their funding at the beginning of the administration before I joined up, and then we have a lawsuit against them. They're refusing to give us their documents to prove their compliance with Students for Fair Admissions, the non-discrimination law from the Supreme Court, and then their anti-Semitism. And so, they're slow rolling these lawsuits, filing motions to dismiss, saying, oh, no, it is. Literally, our anti-Semitism lawsuit is based on Harvard's own review of its own anti-Semitism. And it's actually quite clear. But, the courts take their time. So, there's just a lot going on there that I can't even talk about. But, it's a top focus of this administration to make sure that every single one of your tax dollars that goes to these institutions of higher learning, particularly these elite ones, is spent appropriately. And that means it can't be spent to undermine American priorities, to give preferences to foreign students at the expense of American students, to fund research that goes out the back door to foreign countries, to subject American citizen students to blatant religious bias. We will not tolerate that with a penny of our tax dollars in the United States.
Good. You know, the mayor more than once has called me an Islamophobe. Even the speaker of the council, Julie Menin, twice has called me that. I don't even know what that means. I don't care. Because a phobia, I was taught, has to be an irrational fear, and there's nothing irrational about what I'm yelling about. But on a serious note, and the D.O.J., you know, I make the argument for some reason, but these politicians like Mamdani, they try to level the playing field. They try to make it seem like it's even, like there are just as many Muslim attacks as there are attacks on Jews, which you know is ridiculous. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, black people were getting attacked in the streets, and I'm sure that's still going on, but it doesn't seem like to me any one of these other groups, any one, come close to the attacks on innocent Jewish people. Am I being naive?
No, I mean, look, let me be very clear. We will protect all houses of worship and all people of faith in this country. And, you know, there have been times when certain groups are more under attack than others. My own community, the Sikh community, has been the subject of violent attacks and killings at our temples. But right now, the attacks on churches and synagogues are empirically the most serious of the problems that we have on houses of worship in the United States, the attacks on Jews, and it's really very clear in our universities, for example. So we just have to be very empirical about it. Now, there may be other points in time when it's some other group, and the DOJ stands ready to step in and help all of these groups. It's the law, and we will continue to fully and faithfully enforce that law. And so, you know, right now I'm going where the problems are. I'm like, call us firefighters. We're rushing towards the fire, and the fire is in the synagogues, and the fire is the stabbings and attacks on the streets of New York City on visibly Jewish individuals, and in Los Angeles, and wherever we find them. And so we are there to help. And, you know, I just am proud to be able to do this job on behalf of the United States.
God, we're proud to have you. Last one, you said earlier in the conversation that part of the problem is these people are voted in like Mamdani, and you're right. There are too many young, blonde girls who live in Williamsburg or the Upper East Side whose parents have money, the morons, and they ran to vote for this guy. They were so enthusiastic, and that's why he won. I get very angry with people when they talk about rigged elections because I think this guy actually won. But for what it's worth, I had two very reputable guests in my studio last week, Harmeet, Marley Honig, and Dr. Naomi Wolf. Both are very bright and both presented me with a ton of information that Mamdani never won. Are you guys looking into that?
Well, I cannot comment on any ongoing investigations that we might be doing, but I will say that investigating election fraud and irregularities in voter registrations and so forth is part of my portfolio. You know, and I've publicly stated in response to the New Jersey disclosure last week that thousands of people are on the voter rolls who shouldn't be. That's at a minimum, and hundreds of them voted. You know, that we're investigating that for sure. And so anybody who has credible evidence of irregularities, voter fraud, particularly that affected any federal election, and of course, you know, the many municipal elections like the one that you're describing also includes a federal component. We look into that. We have a growing team of lawyers. We work with the U.S. attorney's offices around the country, and I'm aware of many investigations. And so, you know, the past, to be honest with you, people have been shamed away. Law enforcement officials have been shamed away from looking at these things because we would get criticized saying, oh, there's no evidence of voter fraud, and some people would back down. And then they change the goalpost after the evidence comes out, and they say evidence of widespread voter fraud, and then, you know, some people would back down because of that. And now that we have widespread voter fraud, the goalposts have moved to two things. First, they say, well, it didn't affect the outcome of the election. I don't know how Governor Sherrill can say that because we don't know exactly what the effects were. And then finally, let's look at Trump. Let's change the subject and talk about Orange Man Band. So that's what they'd say when they've got nothing left.
Right.
And so we're not going to be intimidated or deterred away from any of that. And, just rest assured that it's a top priority for us.
I mean, what I say, we are so lucky to have you. You're such an impressive, amazing woman. Harmeet Dhillon, Civil Rights Division, D.O.J, needs to be right there with Blanche in charge of all of it in this country. Harmeet, I can't say enough nice things about you. Please keep fighting for us. And thank you so much for this appearance and what you do every day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
God bless you. I love you. That's Harmeet Dhillon right there. I really do love that lady. She's terrific.
Thanks for listening to Sid and Friends in the Morning. You can hear Sid and Friends in the Morning weekday mornings at 6. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?